Adam Baldwin for AFLPlayers.com.au. We're now lucky enough to be joined by John Harms, AFL historian and writer, who's put together the first 40 years of the PA. John, fascinating tale, isn't it?
It's terrific, yeah, and it hasn't really been told, or it's not in the public memory really, I suppose, is the thing, and it deserves to be, absolutely deserves to be, because it's full of rich characters and it's full of the things that they did in the interests of the players, because initially the players didn't have much of a voice, and given they're the ones putting on the game, they're the performers, they're the players, they deserve a voice.
And it's not just a footy story, is it? It's, at a time it was, socially very disruptive, I guess, and there was a lot going on, wasn't there?
Well, if you look at the traditional post-World War II period, the 50s, the Menzies era, going into the 60s, quite conservative. You then had the Vietnam War, you had the rise of the counterculture, you had the protest movement, you had all those, the radical students of the time. There was change, and you've got to understand that footy does not exist outside of the social context, the political context, the cultural context. So that change was always going to permeate football. So if there were these autocratic styles of running clubs or running the league, then there was going to be a clash with those younger guys who felt like they had a voice, or they should have a voice. And if they didn't have a voice, they were going to take that voice. And so they started to say, well, hang on, guys, all we want is what's fair. This wasn't a push for pay. This wasn't a push for ridiculous conditions. This was just, look, we're putting in the hard yards. It's an increasingly professional sport, still semi-professional, so we deserve something, but not only that, we deserve the respect. So Gareth Andrews talks about that. He felt like the club owned him. He felt like, look, we just want you to understand that we deserve a voice in this. And gradually that push came to Gareth and Jeff Pryor meeting together over lunch in a pub and talking about it and talking to others about it, and they'd known each other for a long time. And from those pub meetings, they had a meeting in someone's place, gathering more players together, and clearly it was the players had a similar view. And eventually they called a formal meeting at the University of Melbourne in the Union Building on December the 10th, 1973, and they agreed to form a Players Association. There was another meeting in the February, and away she's gone. They set up an executive, they had delegates from each club. Wasn't well received, but by the VFL or by some people within the football community, but there they were. They had an association that then could at least convey what the players were thinking, feeling, and so on.
And the legacy of Jeff Pryor is only just becoming apparent, isn't it?
Yeah, well, all of the guys, and Jeff's, it's interesting, different people have different skills, and Jeff comes from a philosophical position which is of the left, so he's very community-minded. He had involvement in the Labor Party. He was a staffer on the campaign of Moss Cass, who became the member for Maribyrnong in that late 60s period where the Conservative rule was being usurped by the rise of the Whitlam period. Whitlam was eventually elected in 1972. So Jeff understood what an organisation of workers was about and how you had to be very careful because unions were on the nose, that there were strikes, and in conservative Australia there's this sense that, well, hang on, unions, bit subversive, bit treacherous even, no, come on, conservative politics is not politics. Trade unions are politics, they're the agitators. So you're fighting these community positions, these community understandings. So for the players to come out and say we're a trade union would have been a PR disaster. So Jeff had these understandings because he understood how hard it was for workers generally in Australia. So to apply that to the football context, it was important that he knew that. Gareth had the passion as well. Like he had the sense of the individual rights, what players were deserving of, and that was through his own experience. So you bring these two together and then you gather other guys with a sense of social responsibility, people who think outside themselves, who think, no, it's just not me looking for better pay or conditions for myself, but what's the whole player group like? And especially for the guys who were in the lower half of the list, sure, the stars were fated and well looked after, but what about your rank and file player who's earning in the mid-60s, $35 a game, up to $45 a game. No contract, just a match payment. So no sense of security about it all. And what happens when you get injured? And what happens when you retire? And all these different things that clubs just weren't thinking of. But Gareth, Jeff, Desmar, Swan Mackay, Ray Smith, and others gradually gathering around, really important in developing that understanding and encouraging their fellow players to join in. Because as we know, in workers' organisations, you've got to be all in. There's no point. That's where the workers' strength is that if they all get behind each other, because ultimately all they can do is say, well, guys, and this is what happened in 1981, look, we're not going to play. You just please listen to us. You got to at least recognise us. So there was a big blow up in 1981.
Thanks, John. The document titled All In, which details the formative years of the AFL/VFL Players Association, is available at aflplayers.com.au.